So many organisations that are using sport to make a difference. I've been with UK Sport for just less than 2 years, and one of the first stories I've heard since joining has been the extraordinary journey of Magic Bus, what it stands for, what it's achieved, and aiming to do next. It's therefore a double privilege for me and to be here. I find your goal, your people, and the success that you're achieving truly inspirational, so thank you for having me here. Some of you know UK Sport is the government agency in the UK that is responsible for British medal success at the Olympic and Paralympic Games. And so whilst our focus is predominantly on elite sport, we've also been involved in sport development for over 20 years now, working with over 30 countries in developing quality sport worldwide. At the heart of our work is the belief that many of us here share, is the belief that quality, safe, inclusive sport is a fundamental right for all and therefore should be accessible to everyone, regardless of your background and whether you come from a community in the UK, Senegal, Bangladesh or Rio. We widen access to sport to create more opportunities for people, especially children and young people, to play, develop and learn through sport. Just a couple of examples of work that perhaps is slightly different from what some of you may do is that we develop international programs that are linked to major sporting events that take place in the UK. For example, in the next few years, we've got the Rugby World Cup in 2015, we've got the World Athletics Championships in 2017 in London, and we've also got the Hockey World Cup in 2018. So we develop global sport initiatives which are aimed at ensuring that investment goes into community coaches worldwide, high quality sport, inclusive PE, and continuing opportunity to play those sports at whatever level people feel comfortable with, to create a lasting legacy worldwide, capable of transforming a moment of inspiration through these World Championships into real opportunity and lifelong participation in sport. Three main aspects that I think are core to our work. Connectivity. We as a government agency connect a lot of sports in the UK, including agencies, universities, national federations, with international partners overseas to help build sustainable sport and systems and share learning and grow. The other element is advocacy. We champion like many of us here, the role of sport within government and intergovernmental institutions as well, on how sport, when managed carefully and when taking into account the local context, the needs and respecting local conditions, can actively contribute to national goals around development, health, livelihoods, diplomacy and so on. And we also champion and work with others to promote good governance in sport and through sport, leadership and safeguarding as well. And the third one, which some speakers have referred to before, is impact. Our work is centered on children and young people, whatever their gender, social and economic background, physical ability, taking part in sport. And through sport, these people are being provided with opportunities and skills and services that would otherwise be impossible or hard for them to access. And our work in the last 5 years, just to give you a sense, has reached over 16 million children worldwide and influenced over 40 government policies, and that's been verified independently. So we are proud of the work that we're doing with so many of you here, but the work is challenging ahead. In seeking to provide and engage and empowering through sport, particularly youth and the excluded. So for instance, people with disabilities who are often ostracized from their societies, girls and young women who are vulnerable to violence and not able to access education, for instance, and indeed boys and young men who are disillusioned, unattached, or vulnerable to crime and conflict. This question about what do we mean by empowerment and how do we even attempt to achieve it, the impact, and how do we measure it, and even how do we get others to take notice is a huge challenge, and one that I really hope to unpack a little bit over the next few days here at the conference. And again, just to echo particularly what Matthew was saying, at the centre of what we do is partnership working. We're only able to operate and attempt to achieve, attempt to make a difference through the privilege of working with organisations such as those represented here. So I'm so looking forward to the next few days, sharing, learning and building on new ideas to actually think of how we can make this more effective, and using sport not just as a tool but actually as part of a wider strategy to ultimately make life better for so many people out there. So thank you very much for having me here. I look forward to it.
Thank you, Mr. Morini, for your encouragement. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is a member of the FIFA Executive Committee, Director at Football Federation Australia, and Vice President at Asian Football Confederation. Please put your hands together as I invite Ms. Moya Dodd to deliver her address.
Thank you very much. Good morning, distinguished guests, speakers and participants. What a great day and what a great topic we share, something that's very close to my heart. My name is Moya Dodd. I'm a football player. I had the great privilege of representing Australia back in the day, and I still play in an over 35s team that's getting worse and worse every year, but nonetheless we still enjoy it. In my day job, I'm a lawyer. I'm a partner at Gilbert & Tobin, an Australian law firm. And as you've heard, I sit on committees in football. That's probably certainly a greater contribution off the field than on the field these days, but it's certainly a wonderful challenge. And I'm here because I, like you, believe that sport, and football in particular, is an immensely powerful means to build a better world. Why? Because I've seen it and because I've experienced it. I've seen how playing sport regularly, playing football regularly, gives you better health. It gives you fitness for lifelong health. I've seen the power of participation and of inclusion, of being part of something bigger that inspires kids and adults to be at their best. I've felt the feeling of mastery, of doing something better than you did it yesterday, of doing it well, of making a difference for your team, even though you're only one person. And I've seen how football can teach you. I've seen the learning that it can bring, both as an individual, where you learn to work and improve, you learn that work pays off, that teams improve, the power of collaboration and of joint action to achieve something. And I think football is almost the perfect balance between individual innovation and mastery and team action, because each individual can make a huge difference to the game, but no individual can do that on their own. And I've seen how it can teach us all to deal with setbacks and failures, some of which are our own shortcomings and some of which are not your fault at all. They might be a poor refereeing decision or a bad tackle that the other team inflicted on you. But dealing with a setback when it's unfair is a great lesson, not just in football but also in life. And I've seen how it creates opportunity. Just the fact that I'm here today, meeting all of you and speaking with you about a topic that we're all passionate about, is something that only came about for me through football. And the opportunity to contribute in a global body like FIFA is also something that I would never have dreamt of as a kid kicking a ball around. And the chance to meet and travel and engage is something that gives us all the chance to find solutions. I think human interaction is what generates innovation, it generates solutions. So I hope over the next 4 days that we generate some here. And of course this applies on the field. All those lessons apply on the field to make you a better player. And they also apply off the field to make you a better worker, a better citizen, a better family member, a better parent or partner. I've experienced that personally, and I've seen how it's applied to others. I've seen refugees newly arrived in Australia, people who've lost everything about their old life, family members, possessions, homes, everything that's familiar, and often the only bit of familiarity they have and can bring with them is football. And that's their foothold to a new life. It's the only constant in a world for them that's been devastated. I've seen how it applies to differently abled kids. I had the great pleasure of conducting a workshop for some kids in Abu Dhabi last year. We played a modified game. There were some kids who were less mobile than others, so they were in the goal-scoring zones at each end of the field, and in the middle, the more mobile kids were thrashing it out in midfield. And I'll never forget the look on the face of one of the least mobile kids there, who had an opportunity in front of goal and scored it. It was almost in slow motion, but I think she would have remembered every moment of that ball going into the net. And I learned that from the look on her face it's exactly the same feeling that you get when you score a goal in a big match, and I'm sure it's what Marta or Messi feel when they score at the very highest level in a World Cup. It's the moment when you conquer everything, and that feeling's actually available to all of us through sport. It's not whether you climbed a tall mountain or a shorter mountain, it's the fact that you got to the top of it and what you could see from there. That's the moment that sport gives you. So if you want to feel like Marta or Messi, just play football. It's that simple. I've seen also how changing the hijab rule, the rule that previously existed in football, that if you wore a headscarf you couldn't play in a FIFA World Cup or an Olympics game. The changing of that rule has opened up the dream of elite football to hundreds of millions of Muslim women and girls in the world. There are about 500 million Muslim women and girls in the world. And changing that rule, for which I have to acknowledge the work of Prince Ali of Jordan, who's also a supporter of Next Step. Changing that rule, I think, is an important practical and symbolic step in showing that accessibility is really for the world. Everyone in the world can play football. And now, for the first time ever, we see a West Asian women's football team making it to the finals of the Women's Asian Cup. And perhaps it's good karma. That's a great acknowledgement. Perhaps it's good karma, but it's Prince Ali's team, Jordan, that's made it, and they'll be representing their country in Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam in May for the finals of the Women's Asian Cup. And for their troubles, they actually get to play the world champions, Japan, and they also play Australia and the host country, Vietnam. So there's 3 fixtures for all of us to look forward to. But of course, I couldn't stand here today without mentioning the situation of women and girls in the world and the disadvantages that they face. Today, wherever in the world you're born, if you're born female, you're more likely to be poor, you're more likely to be abused, you're more likely to suffer sexual violence or even slavery, and you're more likely to be denied access to education and opportunity that would enable you to lift yourself out of those situations. And yet, improving the lot of women and girls is a powerful leverage point to improve the situation of everyone in society. Why? Because the benefits that accrue to women flow on to everyone around her. They flow to the whole family unit. And her participation in the workforce and in the economy grows the GDP of the whole nation. So she is the point at which you can break the cycle, at which you can intervene and you can say, stop with that, let's do things differently from here. So where does football fit into that? Well, as I'm sure you know, for many, many decades, football was a man's game. It was played by men, run by men, for the benefit of the men watching. And actually, women were banned completely from playing football for many decades in many countries, in England, in Germany, in Holland, in France, in Brazil, some of the greatest football nations on earth, banned women from playing the game. In England, that ban was lifted only in the 70s. I was at primary school and women's football was banned. But at the same time, at least I think, that it's the best game in the world. It's the sport that the world loves most. And what better way to give a girl a chance than by letting her in on the world's best game? And not just for her, but also to show the boys that she plays with and against as they look across the field and they see her participating in the game that was once the preserve of men, then they too realise that the world is hers too, and she is a part of it and can equally participate with them in the solutions for the next generation. So as we face the planet's big challenges, we need all of us to be part of the solution, and we all need to be at our best to contribute to that solution. And for me, football and sport is the world's common language, and that's a very big part of making that happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Dort, for your very encouraging and kind words and for holding the flag high for all of us women out there in football. Ladies and gentlemen, I now take the pleasure of inviting our next speaker, Ms. Sophie Bouvet, Director, International Relations at Australian Sports Commission. Please put your hands together as I invite her to give her address.
Thank you very much. I understand there's some technical difficulties this morning with the PowerPoint presentation, so I've been asked to do hand signals every time we need to change the PowerPoint presentation. But I'm a woman, and we're very good at multitasking, so I expect that, we'll manage this technical glitch. I'm Sophie Bouvet. I'm here to talk about the Australian Sports Outreach Programme, which is a programme funded by the Australian government. The Australian Sports Outreach Programme is delivered in partnerships with governments, non-government societies, and sports federations. We find the Australian Sports Outreach currently delivered in 9 countries in the Pacific, as well here in India and in the Caribbean. What's important for the Australian Sports Outreach programs is we work in partnership to assist our partners to achieve on their outcomes. And that's crucial for our programming. Next slide, please. I'm not sure, I could do YMCA or something like that. So why Next Step is so important? In my opinion, this is an opportunity to celebrate the positive impact of sport on people and on their communities. It's also an opportunity to recognize the validation, or I would say the authentication, of the sport for development sector over the last 5 years, especially here in India. And also, it's an opportunity to ponder on what might get in the way, what can go wrong, and how we can manage and prepare to mitigate those risks. Next slide, please. So what are we celebrating? As mentioned by previous speakers, Loris and Mr. Lemke, what is really important is actually that to understand, what makes a sport for development program successful. So as part of the Australian Sports Outreach Program, we are conducting a 3-year independent research in the Pacific. And also, all our partners are working and implementing and are delivering M&E monitoring evaluation systems that gather data to tell us, how the programs are achieving on the objectives as well as how they're making a difference. What we are finding from the first wave of findings from the research we're conducting in the Pacific, specifically from the evidence collected in Vanuatu, Tonga, and Nauru, as well it correlates with the evidence that are coming from the partners monitoring evaluation systems in the Caribbean as well as India, is that when used strategically, well-designed sports program can make a measurable contribution to community outcomes. In the Pacific, for example, the findings are demonstrating that the Australian Sports Outreach Program is contributing to healthier, more inclusive, and more cohesive communities in the Pacific. Next slide, please. So in the context of India, what we're seeing is increased participation in sport and physical activities. And that, in terms of direct benefits, it contributes to the goal of sport for all. More people active more often and for longer, and hopefully for the rest of their lives. But it's also developing leadership capabilities and skills that are life skills, and they're transferable to the employment sector. And hopefully many of the youth will be successful in securing meaningful employments thanks to their participation in sports. Next slide, please. In the context of the Pacific, and I understand it's also a very big issue, around the world and here in India, that contribution to increased level of physical activity is actually contributing to reducing the risk of non-communicable diseases. What we found across all our programs through our research and monitoring evaluation work, what we have collated in terms of qualitative and quantitative data, it has shown that not only more people are active more often, but that reports of weight loss, reduction of tobacco and alcohol consumption, and an overall well-being have been found in all the ASOP activities where we've collected those data. Sport programs also can be linked to other health outcomes. An example, NGOs like Save the Children of Solomons and the NAS Foundation here in India, they're using sports to deliver health, reproductive, and sexual education to youths. So those are non-sporting programs using sports, to engage the youth and deliver, their core messages in terms of sexual reproductive health. Also in the Pacific, there's some very interesting work being done around mental health and around rugby players and engaging people who are subject and youth who are subject to depression and engaging them in ways that they could actually find a safe place to share and connect and find support to help them going through what might say, rough times, in someone's lives, and empower women and girls. An example, in Nauru, very small nation in the Pacific, 40% of the women in the program are exercising leadership, 47% of the leadership positions. But we have reports that these women, once they experience exercising their leadership role in the context of the sports programs, then they go on and carry on other leadership roles in the wider community. So what women are saying is that it gives them the confidence to say, hey, I'm able to exercise leadership roles. I'm able to actually be a leader in my community, and I want to engage in other spheres. Next slide, please. What is really important too, and it's actually, and it's been mentioned by a number of speakers, is the contribution to greater inclusion of people with disability in community life. Our research is showing that helping to build the confidence and self-esteem of people with disability, providing opportunities for them to interact positively with their families and communities, and contributing to breaking down barriers and changing negative attitudes, is contributing to more cohesive and more inclusive community life for people with disability and without disability. Next slide, please. The next part of my presentation, I'd like to talk about the authentication of the sport for development sector. Now, I didn't come up with that term. Rika Day. Where's Rika? Rika Day came up with that term. I asked Rika 2 months ago, I said, Rika, of all the things that have happened in India under the Sports Outreach Program, what do you think has been the biggest impact? And what she said to me, she said, the validation of the sport for development sector in the India context. So what has happened? Well, the sport for development sector has positioned itself as a game changer by increasing participation in sport and also by promoting safe and positive sporting experiences, by building youth capabilities and leadership skills, which are transferable. But it also has shown how different actors, governments, private sector, and other non-sport sector can actually collaborate together for more tangible and sustainable outcomes. But the sport for development sector here in this country has been more influential across sectors, especially in the development arena, and has gained recognition for the contribution it's making to other community outcomes. Next slide, please. So how the sports for development sector is making its mark? Well, there's resources like the Maidan Summit, the website and newsletter. Back in 2010, I did not attend the first Maidan Summit here in India, but what has been reported to me is that that first summit brought together sport for development players that did not know each other and did not realize there were so many people involved in sport for development. But more importantly, those people started to talk to one another and exchange ideas and collaborate and communicate. But another side effect of that is that it has created a much stronger voice of the sport for development sector. There's also the corporate social responsibility forums that have been delivered in this country, where heads of industry and sport for development agencies are coming together, sharing ideas on how they can work together and engage more broadly, at the grassroots level of sports. Last year, in 2013, the landmark report, Power of Play, produced here in India, showcased sport for development organizations that are having a real positive impact and can be scaled up and can work and can be trusted to work with the corporate sector. Just 3 weeks ago, the NAS Foundation received 3 crore Indian rupees of grant for funding raised by the Dasra Giving Circle, which is a philanthropic circle. It will provide the NAS Foundation, more resources to outreach more girls and to continue delivering their program, in more communities, which is very important. Also, the Australian Sports Outreach Program, with all the partners here in India, produced a video, and this video will be shown, I believe, in the next few days. So please look at the video, because it makes the case on how well-designed sports programs are really making a difference in communities. Next slide, please. So what can get in the way? What can go wrong? So we just talk about all the good things that has happened thanks to the sport for development sector and what's happening. But what is really important to remember is that there's a number of things that can stop that progress and actually can regress the movement. And in my opinion, there's actually 4 things. One is the lack of accountability and transparency. Good, sound operational and management processes are required for you delivering the programs. I call that due diligence. That means how organizations are planning their activities, how organizations are making decisions, how organizations are recruiting their staff and volunteers and managing the performance of those, how organizations are reporting to their boards and other stakeholders, how organizations are managing issues. When issues arise or are happening, what do they do? If they have a case of fraud, do they ignore it or do they address it? Funders and also your stakeholders, the children, the parents, your communities, want to see that you have due diligence process in terms of how you go about making your decision and how you go about managing your business. I would say it's equally important to invest on how you run your business than how you invest on delivering your services. The other element, I should say, what can go wrong, it's more like if lack of commitment to effective partnerships. We know sports program can't do it all. And in many instances, sport programs need to partner with other organizations to deliver more tangible outcomes. But what is really important, it's a bit like a marriage, it's not just about getting married, it's about investing in that relationship, and it's a lifelong commitment. So before you actually get married in your partnership, you need to get to know each other, understand the agenda of all the partners involved, understand what are the mutual benefits. Is it the right partnerships to go with? Understanding, what are the risks and being transparent about, discussing those risks and how you're going to go about mitigating those risks. Partnership requires an ongoing commitment for all those involved. Otherwise, partnership can go wrong and it will take a lot of your resources and time to actually fix it or to undo the partnership. Another very important point that other presenters have addressed is the protection and safeguarding of children in sport. Funders and the community at large want safe and an enjoyable environment for all to take part in sport, including children, where children are safe from harm, physical harm, sexual abuse, and mental harm. We also want policies where, the partners in receipt of funding have compliant child protection policy, but also we all want to seek policy compliances. That means good practices as part of the organization that creates a safe environment, and there's buy-in from the CEOs to the volunteers. Everyone needs to be invested in wanting to create a safe space and an enjoyable environment for all to participate. My last point is communication of our stories. In my experience, we all spend a lot of time in designing and implementing programs, but far too little in terms of communicating our stories and our lessons learned. we often do not allocate adequate resources to actually communicate those stories. It's the lessons learned as well as the good stories. And it's not only just for the funders. We owe it to the participants, their parents, their communities, and everyone involved in the activities. To finish my presentation, we're here for this week. You are here, to learn and share your stories. But I'll give you a homework. Those are the 4 areas for me that I think, we need to keep an eye on, and we need to keep refining and reflecting on how we can do better to mitigate risk in those areas. But for your homework, I'm inviting you to reflect on what could be the risk in terms of the bumps on the road, in the way you're going to deliver or you are delivering your programs. And share amongst yourself, what can you do to mitigate those risks? Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Beauvais, for this information about the inspiring programs that you're running, ma'am. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the pleasure of having in our midst the respected guest of honor, Right Honourable Dame Tessa Jowell, Member of Parliament, House of Commons, London, UK. Please join me in welcoming her as I invite her to deliver her address.
Well, good morning, everybody, and can I thank you all very much indeed for inviting me here today, and to welcome all the delegates who've travelled from all over the world, from America, from Europe, from Africa, to make this a truly global conference with a very loud global voice. And thanks very particularly to all my friends in Magic Bus for all the work and organisation, the generosity of the shared vision, which I think is creating the excitement for this conference. And also I'd like to thank with others, join with others in thanking the sponsors of the conference, who are very generously displayed here, particularly the Australian Sports Commission, who have provided an enormous amount of help to Magic Bus, and also obviously the Indian government. Now, I stand here today as a Member of Parliament in the UK government, and as somebody who served as a minister and Secretary of State in government for 13 years. I was, for nearly 9 years, a member of the UK cabinet, and during that time was the person, I suppose, with whom the buck stopped, who had I suppose the idea that bidding to host the Olympic Games in London in 2012 would be a good idea. Not many other people at that time agreed with me, but I think for 10 years I woke up every day and felt that the delivery of the successful Olympics in London 2012 was my job, or certainly my job among many others. And let me just remind you that when London won the right to host the Olympics in 2012, we made a promise to the world, which became known as the Singapore Promise. The Singapore Promise was to inspire a generation of young people through sport. And that, for me, was the beginning of what I hope will be a lifelong involvement in the power of sport and development, discovering the power of the language of sport in development. And in London 2012, we were determined that message would not only be heard in the United Kingdom, but around the world. And for that reason, we set up with UK Sport the International Inspiration Programme that promised to fulfill that promise in what became 20 countries around the world with 15 million children. And my relationship with Magic Bus, I think, began in those very early days when Magic Bus was one of the early organisations, sport and development organisations, that was contributing to the big global voice of international inspiration. Now, with the Winter Olympic Games going on in Sochi, perhaps the preoccupation of the world, and particularly of Russia and all the competing nations, is on excellence, is on the elite achievement of sport. But I think what binds us together here, and millions of other people around our world, is an understanding about the loud voice that sport commands in development. And that isn't just about excellence, it isn't about winning medals, it's about children of the world unlocking their potential through sport. And I have to tell you, it's not only children. When I work with Magic Bus, as I've been lucky enough to do over the last 8 years, one of the highlights is taking a group of children from Mumbai or one of the other states where Magic Bus is now established, 20 states in India. 13. But the ambition goes on. 13 states across India, is to take a group of children to Karjat, to the camp there. And Rob is here taking pictures, but usually he's there running the field centre. And I can remember working with the children during a week, and there are many activities, one of which is a climbing wall. You know, the sort of climbing wall where you grip. And I don't have many phobias or neuroses. The only one I discovered is climbing onto a sloping platform. So you can imagine, as what you hope to be a fully formed adult, and actually at home then quite a senior member of the UK government, being all kitted up in my climbing apparatus and volunteering to climb the wall and face myself with my greatest terror, which is climbing on to a sloping platform, which I did. And I was getting near the platform, and I thought, I do not have the strength in my arms to go any higher. I just do not have the strength. And then I made the mistake of looking down, and I saw 20 faces looking up at me, shouting, Didi Tessa, Didi Tessa, Didi Tessa. So what could I do except feel like Olive in that childhood cartoon of Popeye, swallow the spinach and suddenly find the strength to get on to the platform. So the experience of unlocking your potential is something that doesn't stop at 15 or 20 or 30 or 40 or way beyond in my case. So I learn every time I'm lucky enough to work on the program. But the fact is, you see, with sport and development, that all the evidence is on our side. We don't need any longer to try to persuade the world that sport is a powerful way of tackling depression and underachievement. It's a powerful way of tackling obesity. It's a powerful way of teaching young people the necessary social skills that give them a chance of making it in the modern labour market, in promoting leadership, in developing assertiveness, particularly in girls whose parents may be highly ambivalent or obstructive to their continuing their schooling. So all these are capacities and capabilities that sport, we know, has the power to develop. And when I was thinking about what I would say to you today, I was reminded also of the Christmas truce, perhaps the first time that the power of sport to promote peace was documented, when during the First World War, troops from the German and the British armies played football together and exchanged presents on Christmas Eve all those years ago in 2014. Now, before I became so closely associated with my Magic Bus family, as I've discovered today, I worked with UNICEF on the vaccination program in Bihar in northern India, which is where I was lucky enough to meet Dr. Sujit Ranjan, who now is with Magic Bus, but was part of the drive, the UNICEF drive, to end polio, and was the reason that we all found ourselves for a week in Bihar. And a week in Bihar, supported by Ravi Shastri, a cricketing legend in India, who I can tell you was a more powerful advocate for immunization with reluctant mothers than anybody else. And so again, because sport is so heavily invested with trust, the relationships and the standing of sporting heroes is unimpeachable in the advocacy for health and development. I remember also my times with SCORE in Southern Africa, identifying community leaders and training them as sports coaches, which involved me once in making packed lunches for a sports day where 250 children were expected. But when the word went out around the villages of the Eastern Cape that there was free food, 400 children turned up. And so we really did have then to unpack the lunches and turn food for 250 children into food for 400. I remember working with a group of volunteers on leadership development as part of International Inspiration, where I was lucky enough to meet Ned and be introduced for the first time to the work of Laureus. So sport and develop is never lost in theory, but it's found every day in our countries on scraps of land, in rivers, derelict sites which are reclaimed as places for recreation. But I think what I just want to say, and I know Matthew very well, and I think that I might just be about to bust my time limit. So, no? Okay, all right, well, thank you. If it's about me, you can talk. I'll always talk about you, Matthew. Always talk about Matthew and how much I've learned from Matthew over all these years. But around the world, we see in Kailisha and other townships of South Africa the power of sport tackling HIV and AIDS, dealing with gang and gun violence through the extraordinary work of Fight for Peace and other charities. Luke Downey, who works both in East London and also in the favelas in Brazil, and is now stretching the role of his organisation. CSR and the great Premier League in the UK. And we need to make sure that the willing role of the Premier League in CSR is fully developed. And I have to tell you as well that sport is a great calling card, and you can become familiar by association. I remember when Sujit and I were in Bihar visiting a primary school, and this strange woman arrives who doesn't speak Hindi and wants to play with the children, and what do they make of this? So I try to introduce myself, and I say I'm Tessa Joel from the UK government, and of course they all look completely blank. And then I say I work with Tony Blair, and they still look blank, or Gordon Brown, and they still look completely blank. And then I say, but I come from the same country as David Beckham. And immediately there is animation in this tiny classroom, and half the children throw their hands in the air and shout, Beckham, Beckham, we know Beckham, we love Beckham. They find English, you see, through the inspiration of David Beckham and football. But I think what I want to say in a conference that will celebrate so much to be proud of is that we are all pioneers who never sleep or are complacent with the completion of one challenge, always moving to the next horizon. And what really challenges me as we move from London 2012 to the Sochi Olympics is the extent to which I believe that we have to work together to foster a greater sense of obligation for this legacy, both in the International Olympic Committee, and I'm so pleased that Mova is here today, also in FIFA, to take on sport for development as a core purpose and a continuing role, which moves beyond the responsibility and the sponsorship of whichever host country is in the limelight, because legacy can only be created and sustained in the long term. So that, I hope, might be our invitation, both to the IOC and FIFA, both of whom I think are open-minded and willing. And also to extend that message to sponsors, because sponsorship of the Olympic Games, of the World Cup, is highly prized by sponsors. So let's build the inextricable message that commercial success is greatest when it also carries a strong social purpose for sport and development. And social purpose, in turn, builds commercial success. So I hope that the next few days will move that challenge to engage the great governing bodies of sport to join with us, that will create a challenge and translate it into a call that cannot be ignored. The language of sport as a driver of development change, wherever we are in the world. Because that language is a universal language, understood through our different spoken languages in every country from which we have come. So let's build together as advocates, as the loudest spokespeople for that message, both in relation to our own governments, but also the global institutions that govern sport and that manage so much of the public expectation of sport. That we have global sport, but the best global sport is also sport that accepts the responsibility and the potential of development, unlocking the potential of millions of our children around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your gracious presence here today and sharing some of those memorable experiences with us. Ladies and gentlemen, when I was learning to decipher my tennis terminology, I relearned my ABC. I was told that A stands for Amritraj, B stands for Bog, and C for corners. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Indian tennis legend and UN Messenger of Peace, our Honorable Chief Guest, Mr. Vijay Amritraj, as I invite him to deliver the welcome address.
Thank you very much. There's an old saying in India, you never deliver a speech before lunch. It's the biggest meal for us. The Indian lunch, and then we take a siesta after that. So hold off for a few more minutes, and I think we can get to lunch. But let me first say thank you very much for having me here, Magic Bus. Most important of all, for tracking me down in some part of the world and making sure I made it here in time. Saida, thank you. Pratik, Matthew, thank you all very much. An amazing organization that really makes a difference to what we all aspire to be and aspire to do. My sporting career started many, many years ago in the southern city, what used to be called Madras. And I started my tennis career very simply because I wasn't very well. I was unhealthy. I spent 4 to 6 months in hospital every year for the first 10, 11 years of my life. And my mother used to actually go sit in school for me and take notes and come and teach me in the hospital. I had 4 hours of IV in me every day. And the big dream for my mother's side of the family was tennis. And my late grandfather had a dream that one of us would someday play at Wimbledon, which it was, a pipe dream for someone lying in a hospital bed with IV stuck in his arm. And I think to this day, and that I firmly believe, that if it wasn't for my mother, my parents, who wanted to make sure that I wasn't left behind, that I could be normal and play a sport like other children, to be able to go to school and do my homework, which I was terrible at, to be able to pass an exam, which I couldn't do. My older brother always came first in class. If he came second in class, my house was a morgue. If I passed, my mother handed out sweets to everyone. So I had a lot to live up to as far as my older brother was concerned. But little did we expect that many years later, we would be the first brothers to play at the championships at Wimbledon. It's not the feeling of just a success or the ability to get better at what you do, but it was the fact that we had that incredible support at a young age to be able to live a normal life thereafter. If anyone had told me at that stage in my life that you were going to be able to play major tournaments and play the international tour for over 20 years and play Davis Cup for this great country, I would have honestly laughed at them. We just wanted to be able to go to school, to be able to get a job, and to be able to have an arranged marriage. And that was it. But I think to a great extent, what sport taught me and my family, was that it is exactly what Magic Bus does, and that is sport for good. The fact that we all wanted to excel, that we all wanted to be the best that we could be. You wanted to play at the championships, you wanted to play Davis Cup, you wanted to win it. You wanted to really do it not just for yourself, but when you played Wimbledon and when you played Davis Cup, it was for the country. It was never me, it was never anyone else, it was just being an Indian. And I think that is exactly what drove me to be able to represent this great country of ours for over 20 years on the international tour. I remember when we were growing up, and my parents used to be always asked the question, yes, your children play tennis, but what do they do for a living?